Okay, so I just wanted to go over a couple of things with you guys, especially about Chapter 9. Okay, we're not quizzing over any of this stuff, so I wanted to look at, we did talk about the first key issue, so I wanted to focus a little bit more on the second, or I'm sorry, the third, okay, and where your energy supply is coming from, okay. So the question in key issue 3 was, why are energy resources important for development? And really here I wanted you to pay attention to not necessarily the specifics of percentages. You can look at the graph on page 314. But really and truly, the things that I had really circled and outlined are where it's coming from. Like if you look at this PowerPoint, 5/6 of the world's energy needs are supplied by fossil fuels. And where are those coming from? And a lot of the questions on the test are going to be about most developed countries, your MDCs versus less developed countries. Where's the energy coming from? The dependency on that. Wallerstein's theory talks about that. Again, towards the end of key issue number 4 in chapter 9. That uneven development, the fact that many of our developing countries have a lot of the resources, but either lack the infrastructure to get them to their own people, or simply export them to the more dependent countries like the United States and parts of Western Europe that are core countries, that are developed countries and can afford to import those resources, okay? And also because we consume, most of your most developed countries are going to consume the vast majority of those resources, okay? So that's what I wanted you to kind of get out of that key issue number 3. And it goes on to give you the percentage of the world energy consumed, who's consuming the most. China has overtaken the United States only recently, and that has a lot to do with their population increase and their growing middle class, being able to afford cars, being able to, really being able to step up the ladder of success. Okay, when you consider the population sizes of China versus the United States, it's really starting to say something, that they're starting to consume more than us. But try to remember that they're over 1 billion in population, and we are merely at 320 at best. Okay. The other thing that is mentioned here is the global coal distribution, the petroleum distribution. Pay attention to those things, where it's coming from, who has the most. There's definitely a question about what region of the world has the majority of the petroleum reserves. Okay. I'm trying to think, what else is there? Okay, so pay attention to the where it's being distributed. Okay, who's supplying the majority of it. Okay. The two different things, the proven reserves versus the potential reserves, those are just terms that you need to know. And again, startling that natural gas only has 49 years left in its proven reserves. Okay. And then it talks about your potential reserves, and the differences between the undiscovered fields, and it mentions fracking, the kind of technology that we're dealing with, and what the key issue here is that what used to be the easy oil to get to, where you stuck a hole in the ground and it came up bubbling, is harder and harder to come by. You're going to have higher, more expensive cost and technology to extract the oil that's left in the ground. Not that it can't be done, but it's going to cost more, which is what's going to raise the gas prices and natural gas prices. That what fracking is trying to get the natural gas out of harder to reach places. As it mentioned, I believe in here that natural gas is the byproduct of drilling oil, and that's no longer something that's easy to access because drilling oil is not as easy as it used to be. So unconventional stuff that we're having to get our hands on is going to cost us more money. Okay. OPEC is an organization that you need to be aware of. It's another acronym, the Organization for Petroleum Exporting Countries, formed in 1960 with the countries listed below: Venezuela and Angola, Ecuador, Iran, Nigeria. All of them were added later, but your original members were there listed on top. Okay. You do need to know about the 1970s and 1980s. Oil prices, lack of supply that happened during that time. And then not much about your nuclear energy. I'm not going to ask any questions really about that. I will ask a couple of questions about where it's found in the United States, as far as where the oil reserves are found, where your natural gas can be found in the United States. And then these are all common sense to me, your different types of renewable energy, especially your wind energy. And solar. Now, here's the part that we really need to talk about: your self-sufficiency, your international trade, what those two particular theories are, okay? How countries can gain, how they can develop, okay? And it lists specifically self-sufficiency model. Countries encourage domestic production of goods, discourage foreign ownership of businesses and resources, and protect their businesses from international competition, okay? It's difficult to have a self-sufficiency model, but they do list the pros and cons of it, okay? And they list the key elements of each. The barriers that limit the import of goods to other places, and what they do. They have high taxes for self-sufficiency. Let's look at that, okay? They have high taxes to keep people from wanting to import or export, okay, keeping it within the country. They take care of the businesses that are fledgling, okay, that are not making it. They invest in a spread as equally as possible across the sectors of a country's economy and in all regions. So you're looking at, they're trying all they can to keep companies here within their borders, okay? However, your international trade path is where Rothschild's model comes in, okay? And he talks about the 5 stages of how a place develops, okay? Your traditionals, again, it's very simple to think about. You have a very high percentage of people engaged in agriculture and a high percentage of people, percentage of the national wealth allocated to non-productive activities like the military, okay? If you have a large portion of your population devoted to agriculture, but not a lot of your gross domestic product, meaning you're not making a lot of money off of it, most of your people in your society are living subsistently, okay? And then when you have a country that's in its preconditions, okay, you have an elite group that initiates the innovative economic activities that ultimately stimulate an increase in productivity. All that really means is that you're on the verge of taking off. Okay. In your book, it says, under the influence of these well-educated leaders, the country starts to invest in new technology and infrastructure. Okay. So this is where they start saying, hey, we need to make a difference. We need to change things. We need to start increasing our technology. But it's going to take an elite group of people that are well off in order to get that done. Well off as far as education goes and well off as far as money goes. Okay. And then your takeoff, stage 3, is where you start having, according to your, it's really kind of simplistic in your book. They have textiles, food products. The few takeoff industries achieve technical advances and become productive, whereas other sectors of the economy remain dominated by traditional practices. This particular stage is where you have the beginning stages of manufacturing, of textile mills, meaning clothing. So something besides agriculture, okay? But you still have a large number of your population working in agriculture, even in stage 3, okay? However, your stage 4 is where you drive to maturity. The modern technology pervades from the few takeoff industries that they started in stage 3 to other economic sectors, thus sparking the rapid growth. So you may start seeing more farms, more agriculture that becomes mechanized at that point. Okay, not all of it, but more of it. Okay, where you no longer have just a few industries that are high tech, but you start seeing other parts, nursing, healthcare, those parts start taking off as well outside of the manufacturing. And then stage 5 is where you have the mass consumption, marked by a shift from heavy industry, such as the steel and the auto factories and things like that, to more of consumer goods, meaning that you have a vast majority of your population that has the ability um, to consume more than just work in a heavy factory machine environment. Okay, you've got a lot more motor vehicles, you have refrigerators, the luxuries of life start coming through in the age of mass consumption. And the other video that you watched should do a really good job of explaining Rothschild's model. Okay. And then it lists your challenges to both of these. Okay. Um, the other parts of this that you need to have are, again, this is the triumph. So please just go through this, pause it right here, take note of some of the notes here on the page. It's just an outline really of your chapter for this particular key issue. Okay. What I'll tell you this and learn this now is that every theory, every thought, every concept that comes across your plate in this class is always going to have a pro and a con list. There's always going to be, this is why this works. There's always going to be, this is why people say this doesn't work. It's beneficial and very important for you to understand both sides of that. Because regardless of whether you're looking at what isn't positive about a particular thing, your question on the test could be what is not a negative consequence of this particular theory, or what is a positive consequence of this, or what is a benefit, what is what's the takeaway from this. So you need to see both sides. It's why I like this book, because it gives you both sides of the story. It tells you why self-sufficiency should work and why it works for some, and then it also talks about the drawbacks, because every single theory we have, theory, concept, has a drawback, okay? And you can't just look, oh, well, this is why so-and-so says this works, okay? There's always going to be another geographer that says, well, this is why this doesn't work, and this is why this isn't sustainable, those kind of things. So pay attention to those things, okay? And then this little graph shows you how developing countries, and if you watch the green graph, the green line here on this graph, it shows you how your developing countries are spiking as far as their level of percentage of their GDP that's dealt in trade. That means that they're producing a lot of things that they can trade, okay? And that means that here in your developed countries, they are actually taking a dip, a downturn, if you will. Notice this dip right here, okay? This is back in, if this is 2010, this is 2008, which was the beginning of our financial crisis here in the United States, and that's why you see a dip in trade on this particular chart in 2008. Okay, it was global when it hit the United States, and then it ricocheted into China and Taiwan and the rest of the global community. So there's a reason for this dip right here. Okay, that is our financial crisis that started in the U.S. and went global after that. But this is your percentage of your GDP for your developing countries. You can see where they're headed. Okay, they're definitely making their mark on the world, which means that they're developing, they're hitting that stage 4, where more of their sector, more of their economy is becoming more high tech in all of the sectors of the economy. Okay, that's what you can see by looking at that particular graph. Okay. The other key term here is your structural adjustment loan. It does mention the World Bank. I'm not going to ask you questions about this for this test. Okay, we haven't had enough time to talk about the World Bank And we will talk about it when we get further along in the year. Okay. The one thing that you will be asked about is the structural adjustment loan, because that's a term. Okay. And microfinancing. Okay. So, Wallerstein is the guy that I was talking about with the world systems theory. Okay. That he said that the world systems analysis that unified the world economy will, with developed countries forming an inner core and developing countries occupying the periphery. It's basically a core-periphery relationship between these two sets of worlds. Okay, that the core countries are always going to be dependent on the periphery countries, and the semi-periphery countries are basically your buffer countries in between. They're on the verge of becoming core. They are developed in a lot of their economy as far as mechanization and things like that, but they haven't quite made it. And your periphery countries, 9 out of 10 times, are going to have the vast majority of the resources that the core countries depend on. Okay, and that's what he's saying in his theory. Developing countries in the periphery have less access to the world's center of consumption. They're not going to consume as much. Okay, and yet they are the vast majority of the global population living in the periphery and the semi-periphery. Okay, and I showed you this graph. This is on, what page is it on? It's on it's your last page, 340. Okay, that's that term, uneven development. So it's called a lot of different things, but it's also called the world systems theory. I believe that Mr. Elrod in his video talks about it as the world systems theory. Okay, your dependency theory, that these countries will always be dependent on each other. And if you look at, this is the polar view of the world and where the core countries lie here, Europe, Russia, Japan, even though we know Russia is still considered a semi-periphery country, they have it outlined here. And then you have the rest of your countries living in the periphery, or the less developed part of the world. Okay. That's about it. We're going to talk, the last piece was the fair trade. Okay, there will be a question about that, I believe, on the test, about what fair trade is. Okay, and that's a term. And these are the last key pieces for this particular, that HDI measures the level of development of each country. It's calculated. You guys have done an activity on that by looking at certain items, the standard of living, life expectancy, and access to knowledge, that see that as this is why a particular country should be at a certain level. The other key part is that the UN hasn't found a single country in the world where the women are treated as well as the men, not even in the United States. In fact, we're less well off than in some countries in that regard. Development depends on abundant, low-cost energy. And the last piece here is that to develop more rapidly, developing countries must adopt policies that successfully promote development and find funds to pay for it. So essentially, it's all good and well if you want to develop your country, but you have to have the money to pay for it. You have to have the money to pay back loans in order to pay for it. And when you are faced with, do you educate your public? Do you educate your working class? Do you create jobs for them? Do you build infrastructure? Those are a lot of different factors and a lot of different sectors in a government, in a country. And where do you start? And if all of those things are plaguing your country, it's incredibly difficult to start somewhere and not leave one of those things out. Do you build the infrastructure? Do you, create better education? All of those things. So, and then you have to have the money to pay for it, and the resources to pay back loans. It's just not as easy as some think. So, at any rate, hopefully this is helpful. Again, if you have questions, keep in mind that we have tutors coming after school on Thursday, and I will be here early Friday morning for any help. Okay?